Blah 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 blue Johnny blue blah blah blue 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 blah blah blah. What's going on, everybody? Tim from the Lancaster Smokehouse, and today I'm going to show you how to properly trim a brisket the way that we do it here at the restaurant. We're going to shape it into a really nice shape so that it cooks really evenly. So let's get to it. Cornelius? We've got right here a beautiful fresh brisket, about 16 to 18 pounds. By the time it's trimmed and cooked and final product, it's going to be about half of that. Be gone. So what we want to do is we need to make sure that we are trimming what is necessary, but not too much. Here, that's how we lose money. At home, that's just how you lose portion size. You lose your own money as well. So whenever I'm trimming a brisket and I'm teaching somebody how to trim a brisket, there's 3 things that I say you have to keep in mind. Bearing in mind that all briskets are different. Number 1, the goal is to trim out excess fat. Number 2, the goal is to have an even layer of fat throughout the whole cap, especially in the sides. And number 3 is just to shape it into kind of like a aerodynamic shape so that it cooks evenly when it's on the barbecue. If you have any harsh corners, they tend to get overcooked easily and they will kind of crumble when you go to slice it at the end. First thing we're gonna do is flip it upside down. You can see there's a little piece of fat here. That's where I always like to cut in so that I'm not cutting into the flesh at all. So I like to make a little insertion and then I can just tear this off, trying to kind of drip and make as little a mess as possible. So right now we've got our brisket and it's upside down. And what that means is there's 2 muscles on a brisket. There's the flat and the point. So I'm gonna flip this over so you can kind of see. Right here you'll see this is called a decal. So this is a fat line that's running through the center that kind of goes in between the 2 muscles. So right here, this thinner part, this muscle that runs this way is called the flat. And that's typically your lean. So when someone asks or requests for lean brisket, that's where it comes from. And then this part here that you can see, they split apart here. This whole muscle here is called the point. The point is a lot fattier and juicier. Really, really delicious. That's my favorite part. But we do need to trim it up fairly well. Okay. The other thing to note is when you get your brisket, whether you're getting it from a butcher or a grocery store, wherever you're getting it from, make sure that you're getting the whole brisket with both muscles attached. Sometimes you go to the store and they'll just have the flat or just have the point, and they don't really smoke well when you only do one piece or the other. The fatty part really renders down and keeps the flat moist, so that's why we don't take it apart and divide those muscles. So really important, get a whole brisket. All right, so now we're on to actually trimming the brisket. Make sure you have a good sharp knife and you have a steel with you. It really does help a lot. You want to run your knife through the steel every few cuts. I know it seems a little excessive. It really does a lot to help with the trimming of the brisket. The first thing I like to do is flip the brisket upside down again, and you'll see right here there's a nice big pocket of fat. So we need to remove that fat as much as possible without creating a cavern, because once you create a cavern, it won't cook evenly. The rub won't form a bark, it'll kind of steam, not very nice. We're still gonna end up leaving some of it in there for sure. So we're just gonna make our little cut, our incision. My knife is nice and sharp. Keep your other hand out of the way so you're not cutting into your hand at all. And then we're just taking off that whole fat piece just like that. That's gonna go in our trimming bowl. So there's still gonna be a lot of fat there, which is perfectly fine. I think it's delicious. If you want to cut it out after it's cooked, that's also okay. So on this side, that's really all we're looking for. You can get really nitpicky at home and kind of trim some of this stuff off, but it's totally unnecessary. You're not gonna notice it in the final product. So on the underside, we're pretty much done. So flip it around. This is where this is where the real work begins. You can see I have a good amount of fat on here, so we're gonna remove enough of it so that it's not overly fatty, but we wanna keep a lot of it so that it stays nice and moist. Moist, moist. Right here, you have a little bit of a flap, and that kind of changes depending on your brisket. And we're just gonna take that flap off. Just cutting it so it's kind of making that, again, like that aerodynamic shape, so now it's all smooth the same way. That's perfect. That goes in our trim bowl. Just gonna face it towards you guys. We're gonna trim a little bit of the excess fat. Again, we wanna take off as little meat as possible while getting rid of any of that excess fat. So there's a little fat piece there. I'm gonna run my knife right down that way again. Throw that in my trim bowl. Throw that in my trim bowl. Throw that in my trim bowl. This is actually a pretty nice brisket in terms of the shape. I'm happy with it. This little part right here is kind of a harsh corner. And like I said, if we were to leave that on, it would overcook. it wouldn't cook evenly and it would probably crumble when we go to slice it. So I'm just gonna kind of round that corner out. And every time you make a cut, you're taking money away from your pocket as a restaurant, because that is food that should be served or could be served. So we will get to the trim in a minute and I'll talk about what we can do with it. But in the meantime, we just want to make sure we're not doing too much. So this is kind of our goal. You can see right here, we've got probably about 1/8 to 1/4 inch of fat running through the top right there. And that's kind of going to be our guideline and our goal and our template for when we trim the whole brisket. The rest, you're just making little cuts. I'm going to do a little bit more rounding out on the other side there. So now it's this really nice even shape. I usually do it facing me, but I'm going to try and do it facing you guys so that you can see it. So the next thing I like to do is kind of lift it up, and you can see there's a lot of fat running right here. So what I like to do is cut a nice straight line right through it like that. We've just taken off a big chunk of fat, and we've started to expose a little bit of the meat so we can start seeing where the meat is. I'm going to do one more of those cuts so I can see a little bit more meat. Now we're starting to get some meat. Okay, so here we've got a pocket of fat. So same idea there. Don't create a cavern. And what I mean by that is don't just kind of poke your knife in and pop out a piece of fat so that it's got this indent. That's no good. It's not going to cook evenly. So now that we have taken off most of the bigger chunks of fat, our goal now is really shaping it so that it has that even, consistent fat throughout. You'll often find every time you get a brisket, it's completely different. The brisket, sometimes it might have that little flat piece that I took off that's right here. Might be really lean, might be really fatty, depends on the cow, depends on the processing of it at the plant. So that's why I say you really have to treat each brisket individually. Now you're probably gonna end up slicing a little bit of meat off, and that's not a big deal at all, especially when you're kind of rounding it. So here we've still got a good amount that I want to try and get off. What'll happen if you don't trim your brisket is it just won't render properly when you're smoking it because it's too much to render. And then your final product will be, of course, overly fatty and not cooked as evenly. So you can see with that cut right there, I started exposing a little bit of the meat, which I don't mind up here because it's so fatty. You can see right there how well marbled it is, but that is a sign for me that I need to be a little more careful now and just shape my brisket so I'm not taking off too much. You will find you'll spend most of your time kind of in this area because this is where more of the fat is on it. This area sometimes can be a little hit or miss with the fat. This is a pretty good chunk of fat here, so I am going to trim a little bit of that off. Not too much. Try your best to take it off in kind of long strands like this so that it's nice and even. Okay, so there you go. You've got your nicely trimmed brisket. Takes a lot of practice. We've done a lot over the years, obviously. So, you know, don't be upset if you get home and it doesn't look quite as pretty as you want it to. Really, if you just keep those goals in mind of those 3 goals that I said, that's really what you're going for. I'm happy with how it's trimmed. This is going to smoke really nice, really evenly. Notice there's no harsh corners anywhere. Like I say, aerodynamic, blah, blah, blah. I'm saying the same shit. And when you go to smoke it, make sure that you smoke it this way so that the fat side is up. That's very, very important. I see a lot of people sometimes flipping it upside down. And what happens then is the fat doesn't have a chance to kind of cook into the meat below it. It just drips out. You want to cook it exactly like this when it goes onto your smoker. We do anywhere from 15 to 40 of these a day, depending on, you know, how busy the restaurant is and a lot of catering. Sometimes we'll do even more than that. We have 2 smokers going every night so that we can keep up with that. You might be asking, Tim, what happens to that trim? What do you do with it? So we got a lot of beef fat and we've got some beef meat and scraps here. What most restaurants would do is you cut it with some pork, make sausages, smoke them, and that's how you avoid having any waste. You can also grind the fat and render it, and then you have beef lard or beef tallow that you could then fry in. You could grind it and add some more meat to it and make meatloaf. I've seen people do that. You can make burgers. Anything that is ground is the best way to handle this. Sausage, meatloaf, burgers, whatever you like. So don't let it go to waste. Still perfectly good food. Okay, so that's how we trim a brisket at the Lancaster Smokehouse. Let us know if you want to see how we prepare short ribs, beef ribs, pulled pork, ribs, chicken, whatever you'd like. They've all got different processes. They're all relatively simple, but they take a lot of time and care and attention to detail.